Thanks for joining us today for the next webinar in our Wellbeing series. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen and hand it over to Kimberly Freeman to get us started.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us in the third of our series of well-being workshops for Dornsife. We have talked about kind of general aspects of well-being during the pandemic, and then we've talked about intergenerational well-being, and now we're going to talk about how we navigate these uncertain times, especially as many of us are feeling a great sense of loss of what has been normal to us in times prior to being quarantined and working remotely. So next slide. I asked Disha to include this quote in our presentation because for me, this is a question of framing how I'm going to think about this time. And I love this quote. I have not read the book God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. However, I've heard several podcasts where she has spoken about the pandemic. Can we go back to that slide? And in her talks about the pandemic, I love that she says this period we're in is a gateway and it's a portal to from one world to the next. So I think that's a really important way to, or for me, that's a really important way to frame this period of uncertainty that we have right now. Even before George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, my personal feeling has been a sense of loss and grief around death and a lot of illness in particularly the African American community. So I have been struggling with the statistics every day on the news, listening to the number of people who have been stricken with COVID and who are unfortunately passing away. And each time I hear about, someone passing away or the death toll in different communities, I just think about how there's a diversity, equity, and inclusion dimension to what we are experiencing right now. And then the George Floyd incident was, brought into my living room, like many of you, and seeing him tragically being killed on television. And so this idea of grief and loss, I think, is one that is with me for those reasons, but also because I am grieving the loss of what was normal prior to being quarantined. And interestingly enough, I'll just add this one last point. There was an article in The Atlantic a couple of weeks ago about how within the Black community, there's a familial aspect to grief. And so that also got me to thinking about why I was having the kind of feelings that I was having about George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others who unfortunately have been killed at the hands of law enforcement. So today is really about trying to wrestle with these feelings of loss that we're all having and how we can gain wisdom and insight in this portal or gateway that we're in between the world we knew and the next world. And so I just would ask us to all have an open mind and an open heart as we learn from our experts in the Office of Campus Wellbeing and Education, and to also, approach this with a spirit of gratitude and thankfulness that we are still here. We are still able to come together as our Dornsife family and learn from one another. And so with that, I would like to turn the slides back over to Disha to continue.
I said thank you for that, Kimberly. So today we're going to be going through our agenda. And so we're quickly going to just go through some introductions for those of you who may not be familiar with us yet. And then we're going to hear from our campus wellbeing and education experts, Dr. Ilene Rosenstein and Dr. Quade French, about what grief is. We'll be doing a guided meditation. and we'll get into some nice breakout rooms and do some discussion as well. And then we'll wrap with some final thoughts and be out of here by 3 o'clock. Forgive me while I navigate Zoom also in advance. So as you know, Dr. Kimberly Freeman, she's the Associate Dean and Chief Diversity Officer for USC, and I'm Disha Mahendro. I'm the Director of Diversity Initiatives and Community Building. And we have Dr. Ilene Rosenstein as well. She's the Associate Vice Provost for Campus Wellbeing Education. And we also have Dr. Quade French with us today, who's the Clinical Psychologist in the Office of Campus Wellbeing Education. So now I'll hand it over to our team.
So that's
Sorry about that. There we go.
Yeah, good.
So yeah, I mean, I feel like Kimberly, you did a wonderful job of really sharing your personal experience with these themes of grief and loss in response to everything that's going on. And that's sort of what we wanted to do to open our time today. Just to open it up to you all and give you an opportunity to sort of break out into smaller groups and to talk a little bit about why would we even have loss and grief as a topic today. So we're hoping that we can break you out into smaller groups and just try to have a conversation with each other about what these terms mean for you. And then we'll maybe break for 4 minutes or 5 minutes, and then we'll have you come back and we can sort of get into this idea of loss and grief. Does that sound all right?
Right. So, and we understand that loss and grief could look differently during the time for each of you. And so feel it doesn't have to look exactly like Kimberly's loss or why she's reflecting so much on this. It could be all different types of losses that you're experiencing during this time. So feel free to, just what is meaningful for you to bring up. So, Disha, can we split people into groups? Is that possible? That was a thumb.
Yeah, maybe for 4 or 5 minutes or so.
Okay, so I think we want to first ask the group, were there themes of losses that people saw when they were talking? What are the kind of things that people feel that they've lost recently? Anyone want to speak up?
So from our group, the two themes that came up were travel and kids without sports, which can be a big factor for enlightenment of your children.
So kind of regular recreational stuff that we normally had done in the past aren't here anymore in the same. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Someone wrote fun, just a general loss of fun. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
My group talked about that there was a loss of normalcy and all, that it's just because the situation is out of hand and that we don't really know what's coming up next, that like there's not really any sense of normalcy or security.
That really goes along with that comment that was in the chat also around loss of control, right? It's one thing when we can sort of look ahead and say, okay, 2 more weeks or 3 more weeks or 1 more month, but it really isn't that.
Anybody else want to add? Here, grief related to the loss of life and racism in America, loss of innocence, opportunity, control, a future we had planned. Yeah. I think it's really true that we're reflecting on a sense of profound sadness for many people in terms of our history, what it's been currently, and a sense of people really being hurt and even experiencing death. Yeah. Others for people? So one of the things that I've been hearing is a loss of a sense of safety. stands for our health, our, you know, our well-being. There's been like a loss in the sense of there's a fear of either getting sick or getting stopped, or, you know, just being about. Recently with the curfews that we had originally, a friend of mine who's African American was supposed to come over and go visit some, well, actually their grandmother, and refused to go out, you know, even though it was before the deadline, because just too fearful of what happens if he wasn't there on time and then he was out. And so I think this real fear of kind of one's safety is coming up in a whole host of ways, that kind of things we took, you know, that some people may have taken for granted, and others it was always there, but now it feels like it's really front and center. Does that resonate with any people? We're reading, yeah, a sense of this. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Also, like, you know, accompanying that sense of fear is a sense of worry. And like you said, things that we would normally take for granted, we can't take for granted anymore. A sense of you know, to some degree, a sense of connection, although in another sense, you know, I'm probably a lot more connected to certain members of my family than I've ever been. But I worry about myself, and I worry about them. I worry about, like you said, health. I worry about my brother. You know, is something bad going to happen to him? My sister, is she going to come down with this stuff? You know, or something bad happen to her? You know, it's all of these things, and it's just really, you know, nieces and nephews. It's a lot of worry. You know.
Does that resonate with others? This sense of worry?
There was a comment that I really resonated with also in the chat about helplessness, and I definitely agree. I feel like there's, at a time when the world is undergoing so much change and there are so many people that need a shoulder to lean on, like I want to be that shoulder, and it feels difficult to be so separate from the problem as things keep on coming up and happening around me.
Yeah, and the thought of wanting to be there, but how do you be there? Yeah, right. How do we do this? And yeah, and then there's also the sense of isolation. So not just helplessness, but you know, and there is a sense of reflection going on at this time, and that happens with loss and change. That we kind of go into reflection. Quade, you say something? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's another comment there. I think that, well, there's a couple from Kimberly and Renee also. There's a new baseline of loss and grief that we might not be used to. And you know, this has come up in other conversations with faculty and staff, but the threats that we are facing now are, they're broad, and they're really from all directions, right? There are existential threats. There are threats to society and the order that we might have lived in. There are threats to our physical selves in many different ways. And it can really be a different experience when it's all of those at the same time, rather than just one that we might have to contend with. And not knowing how to address all of those at the same time. And then what Kimberly posted in there as well, an enormous sense of responsibility. And, you know, just generally when people feel a great sense of responsibility to help support change, anytime there's responsibility and we feel that we're not meeting our responsibility that we might be placing on ourselves, it can add a whole nother layer of guilt or shame that we feel like we're not living up to expectations that we might hold for ourselves in there too. And that's just layered on top of all of these other fears and worries around uncertainty as well.
So if we can go to the next slide, this is just some little theory part that's here, but if you look at the top where it says life as usual, there was this sense of you could predict kind of the ups and downs, even if you were having personal crisis or things going on, it felt quite predictable, and I don't think that's happening. It felt familiar. I drove in my car for the first time since March 4th, and I felt like I had never driven before. It was really a strange sensation, and that was something that I did every day without even thinking about it. And then, let's admit this person. And then our daily routines have changed. So when grief happens, there is this change that everything's changed. There's an altered lens that's happening, and part of it's shocking. How many of you are feeling, either by a raise of hands or just chat box, kind of like you're out of shock now? Like in the beginning, when all of this was happening, it was shocking, and it was like disbelief, and it was like you didn't know how long this was going to go, but there was a sense of kind of disorientation and maybe hard to even concentrate going on. And now, are we entering more of a sense of chaos? Or new beginning? Someone in the chat said there's a silver lining. Well, maybe that person has moved to this new beginning piece where there's new connections and new ways of looking at things and arranging things that actually feels good, like there are possibilities. Or are others kind of still at this stage that it feels like I'm angry about this? My 27-year-old daughter kind of was saying she's pissed, and she's angry that the world is in this place, and so she's not there at seeing this as new beginnings. She's kind of still yelling at the past, like, why haven't we taken care of racism before? Why haven't we dealt with X, Y, and Z? Why was the COVID all these questions which often happen in that chaos period. So resonating, and go ahead, Quade.
Yeah, I was just gonna, agree with that, that people can be experiencing this in different ways. And I am just reminded of our previous session that we had around intergenerational differences and how that positionality in life, or people outside, where they might be in their careers or their challenges that they feel responsible for, that could be different for everyone depending on where they're at and where they find themselves in the station in life. And then finally, there's a couple comments in the chat that I think are great, feeling almost locked between certain stages that are in this, or feeling that it's fluid, that it's constantly moving back and forth. And one of the other themes that has come up in a lot of the work with faculty and staff that we've been doing, it's this idea of feeling stuck, but then at the exact same time being fearful of moving out of one particular stage. Is it okay? Like, can I move into this next stage, or can I move on? So that's an interesting dynamic there.
Yeah. And so I'm wondering, for people, if we just look at this for a second, that the understanding is that it's a circle, because you keep going and it's not all in one direction. It actually can move back and forth and be very fluid. And the important thing here is to pay attention to the feelings of the loss, because that's what kind of moves you through to a kind of new beginning healing stage. Can we have the next slide? So we want to just ask in the groups, how are you reacting to life not as usual? Like, what do you find yourself feeling? And I was wondering if we could go into the, go into the groups to really kind of talk about. I think we talked about going into groups at this point, so people have a chance to talk to each other and say, we did this with another group, and they were kind of saying, people were saying, I am not doing okay. I am just still here, and I really want to be feeling okay about life, and I don't. And so I want people to have the opportunity to share with each other. So Disha, if we can put people in groups for about 5 minutes, or maybe a little, yeah, should be good.
Great. So I think most of us are back now. And while we were all in your breakout rooms, I was looking at the chat box, and there's a comment there from Kathleen who says that, they want to go back to taking things more for granted in a sense of knowing what's to come and a sense of control. I mean, and it's a really powerful statement. And so we just wanted to open it up to you all to see, what came up in your breakout groups. How are you reacting to life not as usual? What impact is all of this having on you? How do you find this experience to be for you in response to everything that's going on?
I think that in our group, we were discussing how, for some people, or at least in some interactions that are some observations that we have with going out in public, is that there seems to be a lack of care among other people for, the general safety of society, which is incredibly frustrating that there seems to be this removal and it's not, I don't think that they're maliciously not wearing masks or saying, screw whomever. I think it's just that they feel safe enough and they don't think they're going to run into anybody who may be sick. An issue.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So perhaps just increased vigilance and a sort of response internally. Why aren't you looking out for everyone else around you too? That's a powerful one. How about others? Sometimes it can help, in thinking about these things, sort of what your responses are, how you're reacting, to sort of parse things out, because feelings can be different than thoughts that we have, that can be different than behaviors that we have. So sometimes that's a useful tool for, really doing some self-reflection, saying, oh, well, what are the thoughts that I have about this? Or what are the feelings that I have? Or what are the questions that I have about everything that's going on? Just to provide a bit of a frame. Anything else might have come up for you all?
I just want to mention something that Kathleen brought up, which is that, racism is nothing new. It's not that a piece, that the uncertainty and even how this is being handled and transitions, and what does this mean? And is it becoming an opportunity? Because I heard from some of the people in our group here that we want to move it towards that's an opportunity or a silver lining, that things have, changed. So I'm wondering, in your groups, were you able to share with each other both the parts that feel very frustrating as well as the parts that may feel hopeful? Did anything come up that felt hopeful?
So I'll share. I think that point about, so I guess I'm trying to react with kindness and gratitude, but obviously that takes work. And there is a little bit of a guilt, or I think that the comment about the expectations, that if I get involved with the news or conversation, sometimes that can be overwhelming. And then if I step back, am I not being vigilant? Am I not doing my duty? So there's a lot of questioning of, how much to get involved and how much to step back. And obviously you have to find a balance, but it can be very overwhelming. We talked about the news and social media that sometimes keeps us in that shock stage when you get the next hot headline. And so, but again, with those feelings that might be not not good to yourself, to try to say, what, I'm doing the best I can. I'm trying to be grateful. I'm trying to be not hard on myself, but this is all a lot of dialogue that goes on.
Yeah, and those aren't sort of light topics either, it's not just casual thinking that you're doing. And for many, these are just really sort of deep and powerful questions about self and values and engagement with society around you and pushing for change. And that can be just a huge, huge task. I wonder if we could go to the next slide, sort of given that we're on this topic, of the known past and the unknown future. So it was a funny tweet that someone had posted out, and I'm paraphrasing, but basically they had said that they're tired of unprecedented times. I don't know that they're tired of unprecedented times and they want some precedented times back. And it just really, for me, resonated with that comment from Kathleen about, wanting a sense of stability and being able to expect what's coming next and for that security. And so when we talk about our response to changes that are happening around us, there can be a real longing for a return of the known past in some ways. And there can be a lot of anxiety or fear around what that unknown future is like. But I think, up to this point in our conversation, right, there hasn't been a great balance of, what are those ways in which we're responding that are challenging for us, and then what might some of the hope be that we're trying to find in this process. And we're not by any means saying that you need to be at that point where you're thinking about hope or trying to find those silver linings, but those are just some of the ways in which people can cope, is thinking about the known past, thinking about the unknown future, and really sort of doing that dance and trying to find that balance between, well, maybe there were some things of the known past that were not great, and there's opportunity to change them. But that can be a lot of complex thinking that we're doing. That can be overwhelming in itself. So I don't know if people have thoughts about this idea of the past, present, and future, and how they might be dealing with these complex feelings and what they might be finding themselves doing to cope and handle with everything that's going on.
I'll share.
Great.
So I just have an idea to share. I have taught some change management classes and worked with people to help them get through big changes. And one of the things that I find useful is to have people think about a time in the past when they have gone through a situation that was very uncertain, and they were fearful. And I asked them to write down the fears that they had about that particular situation. What did they think could possibly happen from that? And then I asked them afterwards, after they've laid those all out, I have them calculate how many of those fears actually came true. And it's usually a staggeringly small number, like 25% or something like that. And the idea is that it can give people a little bit of comfort knowing that, you know what, they've gotten through challenging times in the past, and, they will again.
Mm-hmm. I think that's great, being able to remind ourselves of our resiliency and our strength that we've demonstrated in our past and in our history. And then the comments that are flowing in as well, being able to focus on the immediate sphere of influence that you might have, and sort of bringing that scope and scale down from global, right, to immediate. And what are those things that I can do to help myself through this next moment, right, to the next moment, or to the next day. So there's some great ways of thinking about how to deal with some of these experiences and feelings. Anybody else?
So if we go to the next slide, maybe, we had talked about really doing a guided meditation, because both what Meredith is saying and Quade is saying, and I think also in the chat room, is how do we stay in the immediate? How do we start thinking so we really do self-reflect on these things and come out in a certain way to get in touch with ourselves, and therefore kind of get the knowing. So this is based on Javon Golob's meditation. She was a counselor actually at the counseling center, the student counseling center when I was there, but also she she's on Insight Timer, if any of you know that one. And so if you want to do this meditation, please feel free to shut off the camera so you can have privacy that's there. It's going to be short. And just really get comfortable and take a deep breath, one that goes from the top of your head all the way down to your toes. Let it melt away any kind of stress that might be. And know that our gift is awareness, and lovingly attending to it and figuring out where is the grief, the loss, Once you notice where it is, don't judge. It's neither good nor bad. It just is. But if we've been hiding from our sadness, it may have stuck someplace in your body. See if it's stuck, if it's contained someplace. And when you find it, or have an inkling of where it might be, go sit down next to it. Put your arm around it and ask it, how is it doing? What hurts today? What feels like the biggest loss today? And just see what arises. It's good to know, and with this information, with this knowledge, we now know how to nourish the pain we are feeling, how to care for it, look after it, love it. If you feel a swell of sadness, of loss, of pain, welcome it. Let this wave rise inside of you. Let yourself swim in it. Let yourself feel the fullness of the emotion, and let it last as long as it needs to last. A deep well of love, for grief itself is an expression of love. When we lose something, someone, it is an expression of something we cared for deeply. The grief will match the love. And grief is a way of staying connected to that which we loved. So if you find your grief cresting within, it will also recede, and there'll be an immense amount of love and caring as well. You may find other things there too in that spot. Anger, resentment, worry. It's all part of the experience, all worth to be had. The more often you pay attention to these feelings, the more skilled we become, able to navigate and ride these intense emotions, and then cross over to the other side and feel the love, the hope, life itself. When you feel ready, deepen the breath. Feel it from the top to the bottom of your toes. Feel it like a wave through your body, coming and going. And place, if you will, one hand on your heart and honor the experience you just had. And when you're ready, open your eyes and return to the room. So when we do these times to take and feel what are we feeling, it's a natural progression that oftentimes, if we can get in touch with it, we become more comfortable with it. Yeah. And yes, Renee's asking if there's a recording of the yes, it is. So if you go into Insight Timer, I think it's in the reference section, and just look her last, Javonne, Javonne, or you look under grief. They have all the guided meditations, and then you can look under topic grief. Hers comes up, and it's a good one. There's other ones there too. And so anybody want to share a reflection? Was this helpful, not helpful? What did you experience? Did you experience something that was a surprise? Oh, great. Disha's going to share the link in the chat. That's great. Any new learnings, surprises, disappointments? Anyone hate meditation?
I really, I thought that specific meditation was really eye-opening when you spoke about seeing grief as a reflection of how much you loved whatever situation is no longer with you, or whatever person is no longer with you. I think that really helps to not hide from it or bottle it up, because you often think like, oh, to get to the acceptance phase, you need to hold back your tears or hide your sadness. But if you see it more as something that you're welcoming and taking care of, that was really beautiful. So thank you.
Yeah, I love the thing of putting arm around my grief.
Yeah.
Yeah, like being there with my grief and being so kind to it. Yeah. So that's great. And if we go to the next, so just to let people know, after this, we have all the resources, and these are final thoughts that we have, really kind of the self-awareness, mindfulness, being in the present, self-care. Those relationships are important, because when we're grieving, remembering our purpose, our meaning, why we're here. When we've lost something, it's hard to, it's a fuzziness that happens. And so going back to these kind of ways of taking care of ourselves are really ways of giving us the energy to go on. I was talking to a group of people who were saying how hard such social justice work is, and that it's at times there's a lot of pain. And the idea of coming back and understanding the purpose, the meaning for them personally, and kind of helping and joking with each other was really important, along with keeping that resilience. So all of these are things that can help you be resilient during this time of change and challenge. Quade, do you have anything you want to add? And then we'll ask people if they have any questions.
No, I think that was a great wrap up.
So do people have comments, questions, things that we wish we covered or should cover in another section, or just thoughts?
I'd like to share something, and I have this in my notes to mention up front. I may have, but forgive me, I'm having a little foggy brain right now. But I just want to say that, you know, we have in the Office of Diversity wanted to really strengthen the connection between diversity, equity, and inclusion work with wellness and well-being. So this idea of belonging and feeling like we're a part of something bigger is really important to us. And I just want to underscore that, you know, we are much like a family in Dornsife. We may not always get along with our relatives, but we are a family, and we need to support each other throughout this process. And we need these types of conversations so that we can see where we actually have more in common than we have as differences. So I appreciate the collaboration with the Office of Campus Wellbeing and Education, and also the support I received from my team of Disha and Flavio to help produce these webinars, because this really is, I think, at the core of what diversity, equity, and inclusion work is striving for, is this sense of belonging and connection. So thank you for all of you for participating and giving yourself permission to participate and an hour-long session. I mean, it's not easy to carve out this time, but I'm glad that you did.
Yes, so thank you, Ilene, Quade, Kimberly. And as always, we want to share some final resources with you all. We're just about approaching 3 o'clock, so we'll get you all out of here. So we have our Mindful USC and our Ask Ari app that is centered through the Campus Wellbeing and Education Office. And we'll also share some more resources and activities and articles that you can do in the present to be more mindful for your futures and kind of reflect on your past.
And have fun.
And have fun, exactly. And there's also a host of campus resources available for support, counseling, the Center for Work and Family Life, occupational therapy. So we always want to make sure that everyone has access to these. And I will be posting the recording of this session and the slides on the website. And so you can always visit our website at USC Dornsife Diversity. And just to plug our social media really quick, if you have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, you can follow us at USC Dornsife DEI. And I'll just stick that in the chat really quickly also. We're really trying to tell our diversity story through our social media, and we'd love if you could follow us along. And that is all that we have today. And we're looking forward to seeing you at our next webinar, which we'll send out some information on in the next week or two.